Welcome to episode 36 of Leading People with me, Jerry Murray. This episode is brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu, that's WIDECIRCLE.eu. On the morning of Tuesday, 8th of June 2021, I sent an email to this week's guest, Julie Brown. It was an invitation to herself and her husband to be a guest on this podcast. I'd met him on the street a few weeks beforehand, just days before he left for an exploration to Greenland, and I'd forgotten to ask him. I never received a reply. Within hours it became clear why. The news broke that world-renowned polar explorer and leadership guide, Dixie had fallen through a deep crevice in the ice in Greenland, and rescue workers had given up their search for his body. So this episode is partly to honour and celebrate Dixie's life, but it's also a celebration of Julie, his wife, and how she has dealt with this tragedy and given herself permission to thrive. Many leadership lessons shine through in our conversation. It's also a love story on three dimensions. The deep love that Dixie and Julie had for one another, their tremendous love of nature and the environment, and a profound love of life and humanity. Dixie and Julie also published several books illustrating how we can efficiently convert professional challenges into successes and how we can surpass personal dilemmas. These themes feature prominently in our conversation. So, lots to unpack and leadership lessons to be learned. So, Julie Brown, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jerry. It's great to be here.
So, I normally like to start by asking my guests about how they got to where they are today. However, today's program is about two lives. It's about your life and the life of Dixie Donsecourt, who tragically is no longer with us. So I kind of wanted to start by paying tribute to Dixie, celebrate his life a little bit, and highlight the excellent work then that you continue to do in your own right. So perhaps for our listeners, maybe you could tell them a bit about yourself and how you met Dixie and how you came to set up Polar Circles and the work you started doing together across many domains, I think, including the environment and leadership development. So maybe give our listeners a little bit of an insight into Julie Brown and the story that came about after when you met Dixie and how you and he worked together for many years and doing all the great work you did.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk about Dixie. And I met him in 1997. And it's because of him that I'm actually here in our Belgian home office. It's a love story in the beginning. It's a personal story. We met on an airplane between Brussels and Cincinnati, Ohio, in the States. And at the time, we were both working as flight attendants. I was working for Delta Airlines and Dixie for Sabina. And it's a love story. We fell in love, and it was clear that we needed to be on the same continent. And since he was a single father with 3 children, it was a no-brainer. I needed to come this way. So by 1998, I was already a Belgian resident. I'm now a Belgian citizen. And we ended up realizing that his expedition to Antarctica that had just taken place, his very first large polar expedition, had opened doors for us in ways we didn't expect. And I'm just a firm believer in my whole life, when the door opens, it's up to me whether to walk through it or not. In that case, it was very easy to walk through it on Dixie's side. And by walking through it, the opportunities were that suddenly there were so many questions from people about how to achieve grand goals. And the reason that I got pulled into it was at first a bit mysterious for me, but then I realized the team aspect of our coupleship represented a possibility to enable, in that case, Dixie, to do some pretty amazing things in polar exploration and polar expeditions. And within a very short period of time, by the end of 2001, We started our own business. We called it Circles in the beginning and then Polar Circles. And now we have our division Polar Experience. So how did I get here? It started with love and passion on a personal side, but it quickly became professional love and passion together with Dixie.
Okay. Well, let's start with Dixie then, and we'll get to the work that you're doing now with the Polar Experiences, etc., a little bit later on. But many Belgians probably knew Dixie from his expeditions and his regular TV appearances, but they may not have known the man. Now, fortunately, we live very close to each other, and I got to know him. He was an incredibly popular person in our locality here. But tell our listeners a little bit about who was Dixie and what did he stand for in life, and what was his message eventually evolve into what his message was for leaders, how he was able to communicate from his experiences in ways that help leaders perhaps become better leaders.
Dixie was a very positive, very driven, very passionate person. He was someone who had a wonderful sense of humor, and that's probably the thing that connected us in the beginning. We both enjoyed humor very much throughout our lives, and myself today still. Dixie was also someone with seemingly infinite energy. It was a comment that I had growing up in my family was that I needed to slow down, settle down. Dixie took it to a whole other level. So I heard myself for the first time ever saying to another human being, slow down, let's take it a little more, not easy, but let's just slow the pace a bit. And then I would laugh at myself thinking that's karma. He was a man who had no time for excuses. He was incredibly I would say hard on himself, and admittedly, he was human. He could be hard on people around him with his expectations. But as soon as someone would establish a boundary with him, he was enormously respectful of that. And so in our life together, both professionally and personally, I learned a wonderful leadership tip, which was to establish my own boundaries and be able to communicate them before it became something that could be potentially conflicting or uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Dixie was someone who also had a gift of physical endurance. So his commitment to his physical health and his commitment to his ability to what he had hoped be a long life, which he did not get blessed with, that was contagious. So living with him was, on a physical standpoint, a joy. Mm-hmm. Working with him, teams loved working with his energy. It was very, very contagious.
Mm-hmm. My own impression of Dixie was that there always seemed to be a sort of, maybe, okay, what you just said, that he was always demanding on himself, but he always exuded a sort of inner peace, that he was kind of okay with who he was. He wasn't, for the things he had achieved, he was not a guy that was, let's use a colloquial term, in your face and trying to be center of attention and bragging on all that. He was just a guy who you could be standing beside him at watching a football match in the village on a screen, and it would only be if you asked him what he did, he might explain to you. He had that sort of, and also a generosity about him. I always felt, not just generosity in terms of like giving you something, but actually what he was generous with was his time. He could stop and talk to you, even if it was only for 5 minutes, but he could make you feel special, as a human being. And I think that's a quality that, we're in this world where everything seems to be going fast-paced, right? But still, and he was quite, as you say, a driven person, but he still had the ability to give people the space and time and be generous with that, and it wasn't about him. That was the great thing. It wasn't like, guess what I'm doing. It was always, you had to ask him, like, what are you up to? I remember
humility.
It was that. And I remember how this came about a little bit. was I met him in May of 2021. We were walking up the street here around lunchtime, and he was going down with his bike, and he was going to check his equipment. So he was telling us he was going off on his next, which turned out to be his last exposition. And he also told us about learning. He was getting better at Spanish, which we know he was a fantastic linguist. So we'll maybe get to the linguistic stuff in a minute. And it was only afterwards I walked up the street and I said to my wife, you know what? I forgot to ask him to be a guest on the program. And then, of course, I send an email the morning just around the time I sent you that email saying, could I get Dixie on the program? And then the news broke about what happened. Could you maybe explain to listeners who may not know what happened, and then how that led you to really make your own decisions about how to continue on? Because this was quite a tragic situation to find yourself in.
So Dixie and I built our business into not only a corporate business with keynotes and books and offsites. Dixie was a polar guide, and quite often we would take groups on polar expeditions. But in this particular case, he was on what we call the level 3 guided expedition. He had one client with him. They had started out with 2 clients. He had one left. One had dropped out. And on June 7th of last year, the 2 of them found themselves in a crevasse field on the Greenland coast, on the west coast, south of Connacht. And Dixie was guiding our client out of that crevasse field and went through a snow bridge into a crevasse that they estimate must be around 80 to 100 meters deep. It's an estimation they could only get down about 45 meters. Dixie's body is not able to be recovered. It was not seen. The accident was such that his sled was in pieces, and the rope between him and his sled was severed. So the rescuers saw immediately that he had fallen farther. They couldn't get to him. Mm-hmm. This was especially heavy because I was part of the rescue. It was my job as support to be part of the rescue, but I have an amazing business partner in France, Eric Bonem, who took over much of the details from the helicopter pilots to the doctors, etc. But yeah, it was a long 6 hours until we had word that they had been forced to stop for the safety of the rescuers. Right. In that moment, there was something about the professional and the personal was, of course, mixed, but then the personal took over, and I knew that I needed to get our children. We have 4 children, one of whom has a partner who was pregnant with our first grandchild, so I needed to get everybody together and take care of Dixie's parents, who are 90 and 91. And take control of a situation, because it became abundantly clear that this was going to be a public death, a public life, and a public death. Yeah. So that night blended into mourning, and a new type of job started for me, for our family.
Right. Yes. And you told me you had sort of, I think, almost an epiphany kind of moment where you kind of realized that, you had to take control and take charge of this situation. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and it reminded me of. I'm all about training. When we were flight attendants, we were trained for emergencies, big emergencies, and in our media training with our corporate work. We were trained for a sponsor who had asked us to do a media training about 12 years ago so that we could be prepared if that sponsor's company had some sort of calamity, and how would we react in the media. And that training sort of kicked in that moment of, I need to get control of this situation enough to protect the family, and to, most importantly, protect Dixie's legacy, which deserved to be protected in an authentic way. He was human and he had many sides to himself, but I needed to make sure that we were protecting his legacy as he deserved.
Okay. So I'd like to maybe ask you a question about what did you learn from that experience, and how are you taking that forward? I mean, you shared with me some themes and topics that have emerged for you particularly strongly since that experience. So maybe share with our listeners some of that learning that you got and some of the perspectives that you think come out of that for anybody who goes through such a tragedy, but not just that, but just in life in general.
Well, first of all, I'm very lucky. I mean, I know I'm not lucky in the one way that I wish I could change, and I can't. But I have 4 amazing children who have 4 amazing partners. I have a huge support system of friends. And you really, as people say, it's a saying, you find out who your friends are. I really found out who my friends were immediately, and there were a lot of them. I think that learning it starts with the quality that we discussed about Dixie, humility. I would never dare to say to someone, if you go through the tragic loss of a loved one or the tragic loss of a business partner in this case as well, that you have to do this, this, and this. It's so unique and so personal. What did shock me was that I was commended for just getting out of bed in the morning. I found that to be kind of sad that was the only expectation, that I had to just get up and get moving. It seemed like there should be more to what was expected, not of me, but just to get up and take care of things, because a lot of things needed to be taken care of. So I learned that just by literally setting intentions, waking up and before stepping out of bed, setting intentions like I'd always done. I sort of always have done that. I wake up in the morning and I'm grateful to be alive myself. I'm a lover of life, just like Dixie was. We just really enjoyed every little thing about life. So I set intentions for the day, and some days in the last 11 months are, okay, let's get out of bed. Okay, now let's take care of one task, one administrative task, one physical task. I'm hyper aware of sleep right now and the importance of sleep, nutrition, fitness, and again, focus. What's the purpose of the day? What's the purpose of this time? Is my time today going to be more professional than personal? Is my time today going to be family driven? Is it going to be? It really is about setting intentions.
Yeah. Now, all of these, for our listeners out there who are probably already quite intrigued and engaged with this story, these are all very valuable leadership lessons, if not only for self-leadership. But one of the themes you shared with me, which I think comes into this, and probably very much in the last 2 years, a lot of people can identify with, is this notion of having the permission to thrive. What do you mean by having the permission to thrive, and how can our listeners perhaps relate to that in anybody's life out there?
Well, when I had the children finally in my arms and in my midst, I dared to say to them, look, this is really bad, but there are going to be on the side of this tragedy some good things that happen. And you need to live your life. You need to allow yourselves to enjoy the good in the times that are grief-filled. Because grief has no conscience. Grief is going to be there and force itself upon you no matter what. So if you're filling your life with some other things, you shouldn't ignore grief. It's a healthy process. It means you loved somebody. But you're going to have your whole life to grieve your dad. I'm going to have my whole life to grieve this man I shared my life with. So it's okay to also have some good things happening in the midst of it. And It could be something as simple as recognizing that it's a beautiful sunny day, or something as simple as recognizing that the food you're eating tastes particularly delicious. There's nothing wrong with thriving with grief on your side. And I believe that especially as people go through different things, different moments, different eras, there's a timelessness of thriving that translates into all of our activities, all of our accomplishments. And I allow myself each day to have some moment where I feel, is it joy, or is it just feeling particularly cognizant of this beautiful life that I've been given? It sounds very simple sitting here talking with you, Jerry, because it's a positive atmosphere and I feel safe. Some days it's really hard to find joy, but I force myself to find something, and it really helps the whole process that we're going through.
Okay, well, I hope that's encouraging to listeners out there, particularly anybody who has been through moments in whatever part of their life where they've sometimes, as you say, maybe struggled to find the joy, find the meaning, the purpose in their lives. And later, what I'll do is I'll be putting some links in the show notes, and we'll talk about how to get in contact with you. So I'm sure if people want to reach out later, but can we also then relate that back to the theme of the work you were doing around empowering outperformance, and maybe explain to our listeners what you and Dixie meant by empowering outperformance. And maybe how that's still alive today for you in how you're able to do those things like get out of bed and inspire other, because I know you're doing talks and keynotes and stuff. So let's just unpack a little bit what you meant by empowering outperformance. In the next part of our conversation, Julie explains what she and Dixie meant by outperformance. She goes on to talk about the environment and a world of fear and consumption, and how a life well lived involves taking calculated risks on a regular basis, none more so than when you're in a leadership position. So back to our conversation.
Well, I suppose when we originated the tagline, we were perhaps a bit naive. We were basing it on grand goal achievement and the expeditions as the metaphor. And now today I can happily say, at least I know it wasn't all bullshit. It was truly something that's been working for me. So I'm living the messaging that we for many years shared. I think outperformance is a beautiful word. It's probably been overused now, but it's a beautiful word because it means that you're taking yourself beyond the comfort zone. And that was Dixie's thing. Anytime things were a little too comfortable, it made him almost nervous. Like he knew he needed to perhaps make things a little more challenging. For me, outperformance just means that we don't settle for mediocrity if we don't have to. It doesn't mean that every day you're going to go out and win a gold medal. It means that throughout the process of perhaps going for a big goal, you're still pushing yourself beyond what you thought you could do. And that makes life very, very rich. It also allows us to feel as if we're producing. And this is a very strong message that Dixie and I shared and that I continue to share. And that is this idea of fear and consumption. We live in this ever-increasing global society that allows people to push fear upon us, people to manipulate us with what they consider to be risks, and the idea of consumption instead of production. So it's very important to me to help people tap into whatever it is that they can produce. What can they share? What can they make happen instead of just sitting back and absorbing and taking all the time?
So there's a lot of interesting things to unpack there in a way. You I mean, people may not realize, but apart from all the work you did with Dixie, and he did his expeditions, and then he translated a lot of what his approach to that into helping leaders better understand themselves, etc. But there was a high ecological aspect, environmental aspect to the work. He wasn't just going out there for the. I mean, I know he enjoyed it out there. He used to talk about how it was the most beautiful place you could be. Unless you've been there, I think none of us can really understand, but he used to light up, his eyes would sparkle, and he'd go, this was the most. But he was doing good work for the environment as well, wasn't he? He was helping scientists.
Absolutely. In fact, this last expedition, he was working together with the Scientific Exploration Society in the UK, collecting snow samples for some work that was being done through the university in Copenhagen. It's I didn't mention it, but I also did my first polar expedition with Dixie back in 1999 during the millennium. And so I had the privilege to be with him in Antarctica for 6 weeks, which for me was a big deal. And for him, it was like a vacation. And when a person visits the polar regions, especially the interior of a place like Antarctica or the Greenland ice cap, I suppose it's the closest thing we can have toward an interplanetary experience. There's nothing that allows you to feel normalcy. It's all so unique and so, as Dixie would say, a beauty that is transcendent of what we can really understand until you're there. I wish I could take everyone there. So when a person is privileged to go to a place like this, then it's almost a given they come back and want to protect it. And that was a big part of why we were daring to take people to these places, knowing that we had to weigh the balances of the footprint to get people to the polar regions. We felt that it always was a payoff. We were bringing back people who were going to be ambassadors for the polar regions, and it almost always was that case.
Because the paradox, of course, of wishing everybody could experience it would have the counter effect of having everybody go there and create probably damage and everything else. So it's I suppose we'll let people process that paradox for themselves. One thing that I wanted to touch on here, and because people might have this perception, that, well, Dixie was some sort of crazy guy taking really crazy risks and everything else, but that wasn't true. And, talk a little bit about how he went about that, but also how people can approach the concept of risk in their lives. Because he was meticulous, as far as I remember, about how he didn't just jump on a thing and arrive there and hope that he was going to be able to get across the poles, was he? So tell us a little bit about how you both of you, because you were his backup all the time. I know you talked to me many times that you were you were there working with him all the time. He wasn't just gone. You were in constant communication. You were helping him, supporting him. So tell our listeners a bit about how they can approach risk and what you can learn from the work you did with Dixie.
Well, the first thing is, again, back to that word humility. We're facing risks every day. We just don't want to admit it. So with Dixie, we worked with calculated risks. We always spent at least usually 2 to 3 years for the big expeditions, planning, having backup plans, having a backup plan for the backup plan. And of course, many people had the natural response when he died in Greenland to say, well, what do you expect? It's what he did. Then I can only say, okay, but that means that if you are someone with a commute on a highway from one busy city to another, does that mean that you'll necessarily die in a car accident, or with the way some people play with their health, with smoking or drinking or whatever? Just there are risks everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think that a life well lived means that we take those risks, we calculate them, we weigh them, we think things through. And Dixie was, as you said, he was meticulous on the ice. He was extremely conservative. He was extremely concerned about global warming and the signs that he was seeing, especially in Greenland, which to a large extent is the reason that he died. The conditions on the ice cap changed so much. But the risks that he took there were very well calculated, were very well planned. And in the end, he died from an accident. And in the end, we're all going to experience something. We're all getting out of this in the same way that I know. I don't think anybody has been immortal yet.
No.
So risk to me and to Dixie meant you have perceived risks that perhaps may make you decide not to do something at all. And then you have the opportunity to weigh them and calculate and make solid plans. And that's what Dixie did, and that's what I continue to do.
So you mentioned fear earlier. So a lot of people who would look at risk, it might scare them. So how did maybe we can link this to the concept of resilience. How did you both go, okay, but this and this could happen? How did you not let it scare you? How did you kind of go, we can take that into a very, you mentioned that Dixie was a very positive person, a very optimistic guy. So just tell our listeners a little bit how you managed to make that calculation of risk, because you have to identify them, you have to estimate all the possible scenarios from minor to major, how it would play out, and at the same time be able to go, but that's okay.
One of the things a lot of people are afraid of is the pushback. So in a leadership position, when we take a risk on behalf of our team, we anticipate that there will be pushback. For some people, that represents conflict, and conflict is never comfortable. But if that pushback can be a bit perceived ahead of time, planned for ahead of time, it shouldn't be something that stops us. We should be able to have conversations with our teams and not necessarily convince them beyond their will, but help them understand why we're taking risks together. With Dixie and me, I think our whole life started off as risk. We risked moving me from the United States to Belgium. We risked me giving up my job and starting literally a new life over here. I had very few people behind me doing that. Just like Dixie had very few people behind him becoming a polar explorer. So we understood very well what it was to take an unpopular decision, but because it meant so much to us and we were so convinced of the worth of trying, it allowed other people to jump on board. And that, to me, is what's missing sometimes in leadership. We see all sorts of wonderful leadership right now in the world of people who are able to communicate the why behind the risk-taking or the why behind the discomfort that people are about to go through. And it's the communication behind it all that allows us to gather teams of support, which to me is crucial to achieving any goal.
So just given where we're at in some of the events in the world at this moment in time, it almost seems like a true test of leadership is having to deal with adversity, because it's not all about bluster and pontification. It's how you bring people together. We see it in Ukraine at the moment, right?
Amazing.
We see a person who a lot of people had very low regard for, President Zelensky, because I was in Ukraine myself, and it wasn't that they were nasty about him, but there was this undercurrent sometimes that, well, we're kind of this. But you start to see where leadership can emerge from. Is it something that maybe somebody who calls themselves a leader has to go through? Kind of touching on the self-leadership thing here, is that something that you think helps form somebody into something where they can really be a beacon of hope and guidance for other people? Because that's essentially what a lot of leaders are. And in the end, they set some sort of path for others to follow.
I think that the leaders I've respected the most probably don't even call themselves leaders. There's a humility factor of certain leaders that strikes me, people like President Zelensky in Ukraine, or in the time I remember the first few times I heard President Obama speak in the United States, the leadership came out of their joint effort with people. The ability to be in literally the trenches right now, but to literally be in the mix of the changes or the successes, because leadership that leads to success deserves to be celebrated. But it's never just the leader succeeding; it's teams, it's groups. It's so important to feel a part of a team. So yeah, I think just like Dixie, he was my leader. Let's say when we went to Antarctica for the first time together. But we were both in minus 35 degrees. We were both in the same tent with the discomforts that came with it. He had more experience, so I needed him to be my leader. But the actual day-to-day jobs we shared, just like parenting, that's the ultimate example of leadership, where you're in it. It's messy and it's convoluted at times. It's unpredictable. And then there are these wonderful successes that come from a family when it's led well. So I just think that real leadership is the ability to have perhaps made the plans and assembled the team, but to be ready for the fact that when things go wrong, you need to be in it with the people, and you need to be dealing with it together and not from a position outside of the team doing the work.
Yeah. I've heard, forgive me for not remembering the guy's name, was the Canadian guy that went with Dixie? It was a Canadian guy about 7 or 8 years, 10 years ago, said that he had a tremendous trust in Dixie. You guys made a video. He always felt that Dixie, he could turn to Dixie and trust Dixie's judgment. And this is something that I think today a lot of people are not trusting the judgment of the leaders. They're often doubting the motivation of that leader. And certainly trust is at an all-time low. How did Dixie go about creating that trust? What was it about him that people went, well, I trust him?
Well, you're talking about Eric McNair Landry, who's an accomplished polar explorer himself. Yeah. And it was for Dixie so important to go out with younger polar explorers. And the trust factor that Dixie established with them was the fact that he was willing to do what he asked of them. So I think it was really important for him with these younger guys to do role division where each person thrived and each person had skills, but then to also learn from each other. So back when Eric McNair Landry and Dixie did an expedition in Greenland in 2014, Dixie felt that he didn't really understand the technology behind the whole IT situation and how comms communication was changing, the expectations of sponsors requiring more and more communication from the field. And so he made time in the tent each evening to try to learn one thing from Eric that allowed him to feel more capable with IT. And the opposite was that Eric was learning from Dixie certain things like old-fashioned, instead of a GPS, just compass and other types of navigation systems that are timeless and necessary if technology fails. Trust doesn't just happen. We can't just say, hey, trust me. We have to show behavior that earns trust. And a guy like Dixie did that with his actions, his daily actions, his actions outside of polar exploration, behavior, like you say, here in our village or just wherever he was. He had a way of, you said it earlier, he had a way of making people feel special. He didn't just make them feel special, they were special to him. That was authentic. He really wanted to know how you were doing, how your girls were doing. He wanted to know about a person. And if a person had a big plan or a big dream, then Dixie was jumping in there and trying to help and make it happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope our listeners are realizing this. These are tremendous leadership lessons that we're getting here, Julie. And I want to get to one last theme, because I know it's dear to your heart. And maybe we'll sort of dovetail this into the end of the program. So tell us about gender and culture.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. Gender and culture. So obviously I'm a woman, and obviously I mentioned I was born in the United States. My parents were of a diverse background. My dad is the son of a woman who was half Native American from the Huron tribe. My mother was Irish, and there's some German and English in there, I guess. But so culturally, I thought I knew diversity, but I didn't really understand that till I moved to Europe and started living cultural diversity first as an expat and now as a dual citizen. Gender is just what is. We're in a time now where gender is taking on more than a dual aspect. So there's diversity of gender in ways that I think my parents' generation finds at times confusing, and if they're open-minded, interesting. Mm-hmm. My gender as a woman is one that in the corporate sphere, and of course in the expedition world, there were not at the time when I got going with Dixie very many women in polar exploration. Now, luckily, we see more and more. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a word complicity. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be equal as in the same. I think complicity means we take our differences and we blend them and we optimize our team performance. Mm-hmm. But that requires an enormous amount of respect, open-mindedness, and the ability to put ourselves in each other's place. So empathy, enormous amounts of empathy. We're learning. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And
what might get us there, Julie? What might get us there? Some observations, or just your own opinions. What might get us there?
Well, I think when you turn on the news today and you see more and more political leaders who are female. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about male-female gender complicity, when you bring more women to the table, when you bring more trans people to the table, you bring more diversity to the table, and decisions are being made by more people of different perceptions. Mm-hmm. It starts to lift everyone because it forces what used to be a male-dominated, and let's be honest, a white male-dominated world. It forces us to lift ourselves into a place that's encompassing of more people. Okay. And that only makes for a stronger globe. And if you want to take it back down into just a team, it's amazing what can be accomplished when everyone feels representation. Everyone feels heard. Everyone's not going to get what everyone wants. But when we can at least be heard and be treated equally in the way of our performance. So obviously pay or benefits, recognition. These things can be equal.
And respect, because respecting somebody's view, not because they're of a particular gender, but because they're a human being who contributes something from their experience and perspective, yes? Right. And respect is uber important. If you ask the children about my parenting skills, I would guess that they would say, if I ever felt there was disrespect, that's where they would see me react and try to make a correction of some way or ask them to correct. Because it's the one thing that will keep us all moving forward. Without respect, we're lost. So to conclude, are there a few key tips you'd like to leave people with out there? You glance back on not just what happened in the last 12 months or so, but the whole evolution and what you've learned over your life so far. And that, are there a few things, maybe this self-leadership idea, or is there something you could share with our people that they could go out and start exploring straight after they listen to this, or even start exploring now in their heads? Just a few things that you could share with them. In the final few minutes, Julie shares some valuable tips on giving yourself permission to thrive, how she and the family plan to remember Dixie on the first anniversary of his death, and how she is continuing the work that she and Dixie started all those years ago. And she has a special offer for a lucky listener.
As we were preparing for this, I sent you this list of books that have sort of formed me. I believe that the more we learn from others, the more we realize we have more to learn, meaning until I take my last breath, I want to learn as much as I can all the time. So I would say cultivate your curiosity. Get out there and start exposing yourself. Is it through books? Is it through, thankfully, live performances, interactions with speakers? Get yourself out there and open your mind. Mm-hmm. In order to do that, it requires that just the basics of our physicality. I think we really underestimated up until recently how important health was. And I hope that for many companies, the idea of expecting your employees to lose sleep constantly for work, I hope that's a thing of our past. I hope we're all in this place now where we can get people feeling physically ready to get out there and perform. Good sleep, good nutrition, physical fitness, air, outdoor air. I believe that the idea for leadership is really that idea of showing up. Mm-hmm. That means so much to me anymore. Just showing up. Just as I use the example of getting out of bed, but really getting ourselves out there, showing up, doing what we can. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe the one thing I've learned more than anything because of Dixie is that idea that you matter. Your opinion matters. Your presence matters. Your contribution matters. We hear the word billion or billions. How many billions of people are on this planet? And it can have an adverse effect to make us feel less important. But if I learned anything from Dixie is that every single individual matters, and we all have something to contribute, every single one of us.
Well, I think that's fantastic wisdom, and I hope our listeners are pondering that now. What's next for Julie Brown?
Well, we have a little bit of a tough moment. I think the 1-year anniversary of Dixie's passing will be tough. So just getting our family and friends and loved ones through that moment. And then this year will be the last time that we focus on the day that he died. We're shifting the focus back to his birthday as it should be.
Which is in July. It's in July,
yeah,
isn't it? 12th of July, is that right?
The 12th of July. He would have been 60. Yeah. And then from a professional standpoint, learning how to navigate without my business buddy, my business partner. So finding let's say, continuing our activities, but of course the path is different because it's single track now instead of a big wide path together. Writing is my passion. So these last 11 months, writing has been something that's pretty, if I read some of the things I've written, of course, it's very chaotic, but it's been a great handhold. And I'd like to put that into something concise and be able to get a book out there within the next year, I think. So,
yeah. What we didn't mention to our listeners was that you and Dixie authored several books over the years. And I'm going to put links in the show notes, as I mentioned. how can people get in touch with you? And I believe you have a special offer for our listeners. So if you can link those two together, how can people reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I believe you'll share my LinkedIn page on your website. And the offer that I had is, this is the last book that I got to write together with Dixie. It's called Surpassing Sistrugi. So Sistrugi are these sculptures of ice and snow that are beautiful to look at, but they're not very fun to have to navigate around, especially if you're on skis. They are very clumsy. They make us fall. They create resistance. And of course, as you can guess, it's the metaphor for empowering outperformance. And so I wanted to offer one of your listeners a copy of this, which was written in 2014. And then I think contract, it's still offering two areas. We have 5 co-guides at Polar Experience who were personally trained by Dixie. So we're still offering guided expeditions for clients. And then from the corporate side of things, the keynote speeches and the interventions that I do with much pleasure. So I'm about to give my first keynote on the Mont Blanc above Courmayeur in June at 3,400 meters. So that's going to be a first for me. Hope I don't need oxygen.
For all that, I'll put the link to your website so people can check out more about what you do. So we'll put that in the show notes as well. So
thank you.
I hope our listeners have enjoyed this as much as I have. But I never know what to expect when I start these conversations. But I had this feeling that we'd have a wonderful conversation. I think I personally enjoyed it a lot. So I'd like to thank you, Julie, so much for your generously sharing your story, your courage, your insights, and your wisdom with us all today.
Thank you, Jerry. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. You will find details of what we covered in the show with links, etc. in the show notes. Please share your key takeaways from today's guest and let your friends and colleagues know about the podcast. Oh, and if there's a particular author or leading thinker you'd like me to interview, just get in touch and I'll do my best to get them on the show. This episode was brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Until next time.